It's time to talk Kansas City Chiefs football on the Our-Lads Football Network, as the Chiefs and the rest of the NFL are just days away from free agency kicking off. And then, of course, next month on to the NFL draft. So that's why we've been pretty busy with our interviews. And as I've mentioned before, I have 11 teams I am responsible for the 2022 NFL Draft Guide at ourlads.com. And the Chiefs are one of those teams. And that's why we've had on our special guest, Arrowhead Tom, for the past several years to help me get ready for the Draft Guide. How's it going, Arrowhead?
Hey, everything's going well. Yeah, we were talking before the show. I just moved to Kansas City, so it feels even more appropriate to be covering the team, and excited for the offseason. It's always my favorite time of the year.
It does help, doesn't it, to live in the same town of the team you're covering. So
it does, yeah.
And your specialty really with Arrowhead Addict at arrowheadaddict.com is the draft. That's what you really like to do, and that's where most of your content comes from?
Yeah, so I've been I've actually stepped away from Arrowhead Addict just with all the crazy things in my life that have been going on, but I've done some independent coverage, just doing stuff myself. I have a series on my Twitter covering the draft, and I've written up a couple prospects there. And so, yeah, if you want Chiefs draft coverage, you can find me at Twitter on Arrowhead Tom. It's called the Kingdom Building Series, and we've covered some around 35 prospects, and I've got some more that are waiting to be pushed out. So the draft is definitely my thing.
So that is your Twitter handle, at Arrowhead Tom, and of course everything is posted at arrowheadaddict.com. So let's get started. First of all, I want to ask you about, I know it doesn't really have a lot to do with what we're going to get into, but I have to ask you about Eric Bieniemy. I have to. So is he ever going to leave Kansas City?
Man, you'd think so. This offseason started with such a weird, if you follow the team closely, there were some very unverified, very unofficial, rumblings about, this conflict between Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy and Patrick Mahomes. And Andy Reid doesn't really address a lot of rumor mill gossip, stuff like that. And he came out at the combine and went out of his way to say that, like, the relationship with Eric is fine. And so that kind of squashed that. I imagine there is some frustration both on Andy's part and on, Eric's part. Like, he should have at least been given an opportunity. You see some of these coaches around the NFL. I mean, you can, obviously we don't sit in on these interviews, but Urban Meyer got a head coaching job before, Eric Bieniemy, and that was an absolute disaster. So,
so what's the problem? What's the problem? There's got to be a problem. And everybody targets the interview process. It has to be the interviews. He has to be lousy on the interviews. Can he really be that bad?
From what I've gathered and just kind of what everybody who works with him has said is that, like, he's one of those guys who just seems to be an acquired taste. He's a very he's kind of got that personality that's very assertive, and that rubs people the wrong way sometimes. Okay. I can't speak to what the interviews are like, but it seems that seems to be the common denominator is, for whatever reason, he's not interviewing as well. Maybe he's not as prepared, but we're not talking about, Andy Reid has put how many head coaches in the NFL? Yes. I'm sure he's, given at least some guidance to him, and he's recommended Bieniemy year after year after year. I think that there's something about his personality that just doesn't mesh well with the decision makers, the general managers in the NFL.
All right. Well, and Andy Reid, he's not going anywhere, right? There's no timetable on retirement or anything like that, right?
No, I don't see him. I know that when Patrick Mahomes signed that extension a couple years ago, that was a big factor in it, and he talked to Andy and wanted to make sure that he was going to be coaching at least for half of it. So I think there was probably another two or 3 years before we start really thinking about that seriously.
All right, now a player that you and we talked about that you thought would be a really good signing, Orlando Brown, when it happened, before it happened, is now tagged. So how does that work as far as does that pretty much stable the rest of the offensive line right now?
Yeah, so the Chiefs' offensive line turnaround is absolutely incredible from the last time we saw them in that Super Bowl against the Buccaneers and just how awful they were compared to what they look like next year. And not just in terms of, being better players, but being different types of players, really finding a power element to their offensive
Okay.
line. And Orlando Brown was certainly a huge piece of that. He got better as the season went along. He kind of started rough, but having Joe Tooney next to him
Yeah.
helps. And they really, that whole offensive line, they had two rookies starting, and they really gelled as the season went on. And they had some issues at right tackle, but they had some guys to come in and play. And yeah, Orlando Brown's going to be a Chief for the foreseeable future. They tagged him. They're going to work out an extension with him at some point. He just changed agents, and I think that's complicated the process a little bit. And he's also considering representing himself, which may or may
Yeah.
not be a good idea, but I think that's kind of slowed the progress down on a long-term deal. I know that the Chiefs have been very clear about wanting to keep Orlando
Okay,
Brown.
so Niang finally got an opportunity to be a starter last year. He gets hurt. Is he still the man? When he's healthy, he's out there.
I think that they want to give him the chance. I think the potential is still there. The injury he suffered was pretty
Okay.
serious, and he may not even. He's probably going to start the season on the PUP list or on IR. There were some people who were speculating, again, one of those just kind of those rumors and rumblings about it's possible that this injury happened because he hadn't fully healed from the injury that he suffered at TCU, or something didn't heal right. It's a lower leg injury, and when you're a big guy like Lucas Niang, you're an offensive lineman, it's hard to manage that because you do carry so much weight, and there's so much contact and so much involved in anchoring that lower level. I think that he'll be on the roster. I think that they'll keep him around, and they'll definitely welcome him back. Once he's healthy, but they certainly need to bring in some competition, somebody who can hold down that spot. Seems like the team loves him as a player, but your best ability is your availability, and that's going to be a factor, this offseason and when it comes to that right tackle
Okay,
spot.
so is Mike Remmers is he just that type of kind of veteran fix? Do you bring him back, or is this something where this could actually be a priority as far as either free agency or the draft?
I think it's a sneaky need. It's one of the things that the Chiefs, everybody talks about the defense and wide receiver, and they don't really necessarily worry too much about it. You're 4 for 5 on the offensive line. That's doing pretty well. Well, when the rest of the AFC West is adding pass rushers left and right, you probably want to have both your tackles nailed down. So I know Mike Remmers sat out most of the season last year with a back injury, and I don't think that the Chiefs are super optimistic. I think he's about to turn. He's either 33 or 34 years old, so he's probably not coming back. Andrew Wiley filled in for the back half of the season at right tackle and did better than I expected. He was a guy that I kind of was like, maybe they'll trade him and get a late round pick or cut him or something. They kept him around, and he ended up being really valuable down the stretch. So he could be a guy that they look to bring back. I do expect them to kind of test the market, look at what's out there, in free agency in terms of a veteran right tackle that could be brought in.
All right, so that's pretty much seals the offensive line because, like you said, everything else is set. So let's talk about the rest of the offense. At quarterback, do they bring back Kenny?
I think if he wants to play another year, they'll bring him back. They love him in the building, and he's been pretty clutch for them in some pretty big moments. So he's done everything you could ask for him to do in that backup role. And I know that Patrick Mahomes has a lot of respect for his insight into the game.
Okay, at running back, there are a couple of free agents there that they're going to have to make a decision on behind number 1, Edwards-Helaire, and that's Darrell Williams and Jerick McKinnon. McKinnon finally got some playing time late, played well. So what's the status there? Do you think they try to bring both back, along with Derek Gore, who's also on the unit? How do they handle it? One of the two, or both, or neither?
Mm-hmm. So this is another position that might be a little surprising if the Chiefs grab a running back maybe late on day 2 or even early day 3. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire has not been as
True.
advertised. He's not been terrible, but he's struggled certainly. And you look at some of the other backs that were taken after him, namely, Jonathan Taylor. There's been a lot more production from a lot of other players, and so the biggest thing with Edwards-Helaire is there's been that lack of explosiveness, that lack of long runs. He only has, I think, 4 rushes of over 20 yards in his career so far. You compare that to what Jonathan Taylor has done in one season, and
Yeah.
it's just a huge difference. So it wouldn't surprise me if they look to add some fresh legs to that room. I think they really like Darrell Williams, but he's a guy that is limited athletically. Good
Sure.
role player, came in, and when Clyde was hurt, he really filled in very well, put up some solid numbers, but I think that he could end up getting some free agency interest. Jerick McKinnon's a hard one. He's getting closer to 30. He's dealt with some pretty serious injuries. I think if you can get him on a cheap 1-year deal, then you bring him back, and they know him better than any other team at this point. So I'm fine if they bring him back, but it wouldn't surprise me to see a couple of different bodies in that room, at the start of the season.
But definitely you expect, and what would you guess more of, a draft pick or a free agent?
Man, that's hard. I personally want them to draft somebody, especially with how deep this running back class is. I think it's a prime time to grab a guy who can come in here and be that home run threat, to be a little bit more consistent than Clyde has been. I think that they'll definitely make a push to bring back Darrell. They really like him in the building. And then Mckinnon, I think, will be probably one of those guys that, if he doesn't find something better, might sign, later in the offseason after the draft, closer to training camp.
And I don't know after the combine he had, but if Breece Hall were to still slip and be available, would the Chiefs consider taking the top running back on the board?
Are you talking in the
Yes.
first round, or I don't think so.
Even
I
if Hall
think, I
slips.
think that's probably. Yeah, I think, and I need to go back and watch Hall again. I think even with, that being kind of a need, they've definitely got bigger needs, and there's probably going to be some other players that are going to be more enticing. They pretty much, we've got some work on the other side of the ball to do, and they do have Clyde, and they have to try to get something, some type of return on investment. So I would expect it to be a later or a mid-round pick, at that running back position.
All right, the tight ends. Now, we know forever it's been about Travis Kelce. Noah Gray came in last year. So are they set there? Do they just ride Noah Gray now as the number 2, and they could just bring back, Bell cheaply, or number 3 tight end cheaply?
Yeah, we'll see what they do with Blake Bell. There's, again, a guy that they like, who's on the championship team. He's one of those guys that just, like, surprisingly gets more free agency interest than you expect. Noah Gray had a decent rookie season. Again, he was a late round pick. Your expectations aren't too high. Another name to watch. Just, he started off early, and I think he's listed as a tight end. He started as a wide receiver. He's if you remember Demetrius Harris, who was on the Chiefs several years ago. Yeah, he's kind of that same build, that same project that they did with him. Bigger, faster guy. He got hurt early in the season, but I think he caught Mahomes' first 2 touchdowns this year. Or at least he had touchdowns in back-to-back games early in the season, and then got put on IR. They really like him as a developmental player. He could be a guy that they bring in, and it looked like he had finally kind of taken that step and developed. And so before the injury, so assuming he comes back healthy, I think that's going to be a guy that if they have to go into the season next year with Travis Kelce, Noah Gray, and Jody Fortson, they're okay with that.
Now, at wide receiver, Pringle and Robinson are free agents. We know, of course, Hill and Hardman are 2 of the main weapons. So what do you think is the strategy here? Because Robinson actually had the second most snaps of any of the wide receivers on the unit. So he's not a big play guy, but I'm assuming he knows the system, and maybe they count on him because of that. Pringle seemed to take a step up. So do you think, do they want to bring Pringle back, but maybe they'll be outbid? Do they think they didn't want to spend the money there? How's that looking? And if they don't bring back either player, then does that become a definite need?
I think that even if they bring back, both the players, I would call it kind of a need. Pringle definitely stepped up, especially the second half of the season. He was a guy who just, it felt like, every couple of weeks he was just having a big game here or there. They also love him on special teams, so there's some extra value there for them. He's been a guy that they've developed pretty much since he came out of college. Uh, I think that they would like to keep him. Again, it wouldn't surprise me if there's some interest
Yep.
from other teams there, but I could see Pringle being back. I think it's time to move on from Demarcus Robinson, as many snaps as he's gotten. Um, there were just, as the season went on, he started kind of as that third guy, and as the season went on, it just felt like there was a lot of frustrations with him. He would catch a ball and then run backwards, or just try to make too much happen. Concentration drops. So I think Robinson's probably gonna move on, and I definitely think that the Chiefs need to add, excuse me, are going to look to add another receiver in free agency or in the draft. I would guess that they're probably going to lean towards free agency, just because I think that they're trying to contend, and so they might look to get a guy on a 2 to 3 year deal, somebody who wants to get a ring and bring him into the offense, and so they can keep that offense kind of in on the same pace it's been in the last couple
Anybody
years.
out there that you noticed that could be a good fit?
Yeah. It's hard to always, speculate, but I know Allen Robinson has tweeted at Patrick Mahomes a couple times, or tweeted about Chiefs games. So everybody wants to,
Well, all right. Well, let me ask you, time out.
like-
Do they have the money, the Chiefs, to get a top free agent?
Yeah. So that's the tough one, right? That's the hard.
I was
part of
checking out their
the
cap
puzzle.
space,
So
and it seemed like it was okay.
Yeah. So after the franchise tag, they are
Now they're over. Okay.
the cap right now, but the rumored extension for Tyreek Hill would free up some cap space just in the short term. There's some, Brett Veach was pretty candid about Frank Clark's contract needing to be redone, and it seems like either that's going to happen, or he's gonna be possibly a cap casualty.
Okay. So Frank Clark could be cut. Okay.
Yeah, I would be surprised if he was cut, just because they don't have anything. It is a tough spot for them to be in right now. Frank Clark is a big one, and then Patrick Mahomes' contract has some like automatic kind of triggers in it that they can move a bunch of money over to a bonus and create some cap space. So yeah, Allen Robinson's one name to watch, and then Juju Smith-Schuster, who almost signed with the team last year but came back to Pittsburgh for one more year with Ben. He didn't, he was banged up most of the season, but he's a guy that the Chiefs were interested, very openly interested in last year. And so it wouldn't surprise me to see either one of those guys end up in Kansas City. And how the cap magic works, I don't know, but Brett Veach has managed to pull that off a couple times on us so far.
Well, I'll tell you this.
I never doubt,
I'll tell you this. If Allen Robinson, if I was his agent, or if I was one of his family members, I'd be like, dude, you know what you've had to deal with for the past couple of teams and quarterbacks. Even if you sign just a 1 year deal, and you have to, it has to be at a little bit less than you would have gotten somewhere else. Some big deal that some other crappy team with a crappy quarterback is going to throw your way. Just take it, man, and get your stats back, get your reputation back, and then anybody will want you for a long-term deal. So we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the way that he handles the situation, because he's got to do something, because right now I think there are too many people, including myself, that just doesn't know about him anymore. I don't know. I'm trying to blame the quarterbacks and the teams, but it's kind of hard to always just do that when I haven't seen anything out of him the last couple of years.
Yeah, and he's been in quarterback purgatory, and the Chicago Bears have struggled, and I don't know what his relationship is like with Matt Nagy. The Chiefs brought Matt Nagy back as an offensive assistant, quarterbacks coach.
Okay.
So that might be, that could be in their favor or against it. But, there's some knowledge either way that, kind of goes both ways there. But, yeah, I think if he's, again, that 1 year deal, I think Juju Smith-Schuster's one that's a little bit more, he's a younger guy, probably looking for a bigger deal. That would be a little bit more surprising. I don't know what the contract talks were like last year. I know he went back to Pittsburgh on a 1 year deal, and it sounded like his market wasn't huge even last year. So, it may change, but that would be one that I think he offers a little bit different of a skill set, as a number 2 guy, and then you let McColl play in the slot and just kind of move those guys around as needed. Yeah. So he would fit into what the Chiefs need. I just don't know how you make that money work.
By the way, before we turn over to defense at running back, what type of running back do you think they need to pick up?
Um, yeah. So I mean, they need somebody who's going to be able to kind of rip off some of those long runs. The Chiefs have been pretty open about liking bigger running backs. Um, so and this is such a good running back
Yes.
class. You do have guys like Brees Hall. You have guys. Um, I'm just again thinking about the different.
I mean, there's like about 15.
Guy from Michigan State.
Oh, you mean Kenneth Walker? Yeah.
Kenneth Walker. Not necessarily a home run guy, but a guy who's gonna run well for you. I'm a big Isaiah Spiller fan out of Texas A&M, and then I think again, if you're talking mid-round values, guys who can just be consistent and run well. I really have liked the postseason that Brian Robinson out of Alabama has had. He looked better at the Senior Bowl than I thought. And again, he's one of those guys that you're not going to take in the first round, but if you get him in the 4th or 5th round as a rotational guy, I think he's going to offer you some value.
Okay,
so
sounds good.
There's definitely running backs across the board. Somebody who can, in a perfect world, who will offer a little bit more home run threat, a little bit more explosion than what Clyde Edwards has shown so far.
Okay, sounds good. Defense. Now, I have to ask you, I was looking over the stats, and I remember how the season went. Early on, the defense was terrible. And then the defense seemed to pick up late. So I looked at the stats, and I was like, okay, well, this kind of makes a little bit of sense. That the defense gave up a lot of yards, but overall, the points were okay. They're top 10 in points allowed, but bottom 27th really was the number, I believe, in yards allowed. So you look at that and you go, oh, bend but don't break. Well, I don't know if that's the actual strategy, but you tell me.
It was night and day from the first 6 weeks of the season. A lot of, there were some injuries, and then what kind of was the tipping point, as strange as it sounds, because it wasn't a big deal around the NFL. So we talked last time about Chris Jones moving to defensive end.
Yes.
That was a failed experiment.
Okay.
Teams, if you go back and watch the Baltimore game, they were running the option play like directly at Chris Jones, and he didn't, he's not played in that position. He didn't have the discipline to really do that. So Lamar was just reading Jones the entire time, and depending on how he reacted, either handing it off to the back and getting 5 yards, or taking it himself and getting 5 or 8 yards. And they absolutely, teams targeted that early and often in the run game. It was pretty apparent that Jones is better off, inside. And so not only did you lose your all-pro caliber defensive tackle, you moved him to defensive end, and you were getting kind of subpar play.
Yeah.
He made some plays. He's still a freak athlete, but so you kind of you made yourself worse in 2 spots. So they picked up Melvin Ingram at the trade deadline, and just having somebody who was serviceable that the team trusted to go out there and play defensive end and let Chris Jones stay inside and was a huge difference for that defensive line.
Okay.
So that was pretty big in terms of their overall, quality of play. There were some injuries that they had to work through in the cornerback room, and DeAndre Baker was seeing snaps early on, and then he was replaced by some other guys who got healthy, and so it was kind of a revolving door. They were moving the pieces around a lot throughout the season. They also had a tough schedule. That didn't do anybody any favors, especially the opening season.
That's going to happen
really
when
tough
you get to the Super Bowl 2 years in a row.
Yep. Yeah. So it was a tough schedule, and the way it broke down, there's just a long stretch of games that were really tough. But they had a lot of pieces that they had to move around. They got healthy, and then the other part that I think was underrated was the emergence of the 2 young linebackers. So Nick Bolton and Willie Gay started to see, more play time over Ben Neiman, even over Anthony Hitchens. And those guys looked like they could really be, a really good tandem going
They're going
forward.
to take over now. Those are going to be the top 2 linebackers starting this season.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, no, certainly Nick Bolton. And I wasn't a big fan of the Nick Bolton pick when it happened. I was worried about his athleticism. He looked just like the kid at Mizzou that was always in position to make a play. The Tennessee Titans game, I watched Nick Bolton not just like on one occasion, but on multiple occasions, tackle Derrick Henry one-on-one without help.
Yeah.
And I was just like, who is this kid?
Yeah.
How, like, there are not many guys in the NFL who can do that. He got him for a loss a couple times, and even though it was a blowout, for the Titans to, just completely ran over the Chiefs, there were some flashes there, and it looked like that's when the coaching staff went, "Hey, this Bolton kid can play," and he started to see more playing time and really helped that run defense and didn't do too bad in pass defense, and that was one of the concerns. And so his instincts are just so incredible. And Steve Spagnuolo has talked about it, said that he's one of the most instinctual, just intelligent guys he's ever had the chance to coach, which, Steve Spagnuolo has been around for a while. So
now
that's a big compliment for the rookie.
Now, does that mean that they're going to play like all the time, or does Hitchens still get a lot of snaps? And does the number 4 guy, which last year you could say was Neiman, do they bring him back, or they bring someone back to be that, or are they okay with just those top 3?
Yeah, so they actually released Hitchens a little bit ago.
Oh, they did? Okay.
Yes, so I think maybe earlier this month, but they released Hitchens. That was a cap space move.
Okay.
It was also, he just played a lot.
Yeah, he hasn't really been that effective anyway. So.
Yeah, again, great locker room guy. The team liked him, but Nick Bolton is going to be that Mike. He's going to be, lining the defense up. He'll be one of the green dots. And then, like I said, Willie Gay really showed that athletic range that you saw when he was in college, and he was healthy and just made some really big splash plays. So I think those are going to be the top 2 guys. There's certainly going to be a need, hopefully, to add another guy to kind of rotate in there. Ben Neiman, if Ben Neiman never, dresses up for the Chiefs again, I don't think there's anybody who's going to be upset about that in the kingdom. But he's a guy that's going to linger around for a while, and you have to replace those bodies somehow. But I think that they'll look for some veterans in free agency. Damian Wilson, who was part of the championship team, is, I believe, set to hit free agency, and he would be a guy who, the Chiefs might look to bring back on a cheap deal to, again, be somebody who can kind of rotate in and be that, continue to be that mentor for those younger linebackers.
Okay. Keep an eye on that. Meanwhile, by the way, at defensive line, you mentioned Clark, and it wasn't like he had a great year, especially with only 4.5 sacks, but that was like second on the team, I believe, which is not all that great. So, and you mentioned Chris Jones being moved outside. So does this potentially become their biggest need, or one of their biggest needs? They have to get, even though Melvin Ingram came in and did a good job, he's also a free agent. So first of all, do they bring back Ingram? And also, does this become a major need?
I've been worried about the defensive line since going back to last offseason. So not only is Melvin Ingram a free agent, John Reed is a free agent, Derek Nottie is a free agent. So
Okafor too, right?
I think they've only. I'm sorry, what was that? Okafor as well. So they, in terms of what they have like under contract, the cupboard's pretty bare. So you've got Frank Clark, you've got Chris Jones, you've got Turk Wharton, who's an undrafted guy that they really like, and you've got Mike Dana. And so those are guys who have seen snaps and who have played. And, Dana and Wharton are really rotational guys. You need somebody who's going to come in and play that one technique, be your run stuffer, and you have to find another defensive end. And that's hard because, starting defensive ends don't just grow on trees, and, teams aren't really willing to hand those out all the time. So I think my suspicion is that's where they'll look early in the draft, is to get a guy who can come in and play. They did draft Josh Kando last year out of Florida State. He dealt with injuries. I'm not certain that he's going to develop, like they hope, but we didn't see a whole lot of him last year. Okay. So he's also on the roster. They've got a lot of work to do on that defensive line, both at defensive tackle and defensive end. And again, if they can't get Frank Clark to restructure his contract, they have to make a decision on if they keep him or if they let him walk, so that they can use that money to go get somebody else.
Okay. And who was the one tech last year?
John Reed and Derek Nottie.
And could either or both be back, or do you think they're going to just move on?
I think that they could be back. This is Derek Nottie's first time hitting free agency, and so he may look to cash out. Although he had a down year, he dealt with some injuries. John Reed, I think, will be a guy that is probably going to get some interest on the open market. He was really good in Seattle, and then he did a pretty solid job in Kansas City, and kind of ended up being the starting guy, towards the end of the season. So it wouldn't surprise me if somebody came in and was able to offer him more money than the Chiefs could.
Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that. If Reed and Natty do not return, or even if just one of the two returns, then the draft is definitely somewhere we'll also look at, unless they pick up a veteran as well. But obviously not early in the draft. That's because the edge rusher is where they're going to look early, and it could be the first pick. And there's a load of edge rushers that'll still be available when the Chiefs are picking. I mean, even the kid from Minnesota, Mafe, could still be available. So that's how deep it is.
Yep.
So expect maybe the Chiefs to go in that direction. Okay, let's talk about the secondary. And they like to play three safeties a lot, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And with two of the three hitting the open market, I know the fans love Sorensen, so I know they want him back. It sounds like Matthews not going to be back.
Yeah, it would be at this point. I would be more surprised if he was back than if he moved on. It sounds like there's just a pretty big gap in terms of the contract numbers, but also the length of the contract. Matthews kind of up there. He's wanting a 4-year deal, and I think the Chiefs are coming in maybe at 2, possibly willing to go to 3 with a void year. But sounds like Matthews, he knows his value and he knows he's going to get paid somewhere else, and it sounds like that's probably what's going to happen that way.
Okay, so expect the Chiefs to add 2 safeties. And you think what? 1 free agent and then 1. And if they add somebody in the draft, is it a high pick?
It could be. I'm a big fan of Daxton Hill out of Michigan. I'm also a big fan of Jaquan Brisker out of Penn State. So those could be guys that are sneaky picks at the end of round 1 that the Chiefs could look at. Again, if I could, wish on throw my penny in a well and make a wish, I would love the Chiefs to take a run at Marcus Williams, who's the safety from New Orleans, looks like he's going to hit the open market. Young guy who I think just has incredible range and would be a good player to pair with Juan Thornhill back there. And then you can kind of grab a third safety, or even heaven forbid bring back Dan Sorensen to play closer to the box. I'd be surprised if they don't add some type of like you said a safety in the draft and in free agency.
Okay, and then at cornerback, looking here again, almost the same situation. You have a couple of guys that are free agents. Ward and Hughes. Baker's also a free agent, so there's a lot of work to be done there first. So what do you think they do? Because Fenton and Snead, are those a couple of guys that they're? We know Snead, yes, they like. Fenton, is he still a guy that they're really confident about? And so it's more about just getting one more really solid corner, or do they try to re-sign these guys and then they're okay? They don't have to worry about corners high in the draft.
Yeah, I think they would love to bring Charvarius Ford back, but I think he's going to get paid more than what they can, pay him. I think he's going to get paid like a number 1, and he's really kind of a top tier number 2.
Okay.
They do like Fenton. He's been one of those guys. He was a 6th round draft pick, and he is, well overplayed his draft position. He's been huge for them as a depth player. He's been huge for them as a slot player. They do like him. I don't know if they want him to be a full-time starter or if they'd rather him, be kind of that guy that rotates in. Obviously, Snead has, he had an up and down year, but they really like him and his athletic ability. So yeah, the corner is a huge need for them. If they can't bring back Ward, that's another one where I'm like, man, they have some pieces to figure out on this defense. They're, we're sitting here going, okay, the defensive line and the safety position and the cornerback position, it's going to look much different this coming season. It's not going to be like their offense where they've been able to retain all these pieces. They have to make some really tough decisions and make some moves here to stay competitive down the stretch. And especially with, as the AFC West has changed, you have Russell Wilson in the division now, and you have other teams who are really pushing to make a run, and they're chasing the Chiefs, and you have to be, be aggressive and rebuilding this defense. So
enough of these quarterbacks in the AFC, please move them to the NFC already.
Yeah, right. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me to see them sign a guy, and it wouldn't surprise me also to see them draft a guy. Kind of double up, like you said, just like the safety position. And they may, bring back Mike Hughes on a cheap deal. He wasn't. He saw a lot of snaps, but he wasn't. He very up and down.
Okay.
there were days where he made Eli Apple look really good. So it's it was
That's
a
not
tough
good.
season for him.
So Ward is
And
the guy that really determines everything for cornerback. If Ward comes back,
mhm,
they're pretty much okay. They don't have to do
yeah,
anything high in the draft. But if Ward does not come back
hmm
and the right corner slips to them in round 1, is that even possible if they don't get the right edge rusher?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, um, if they end up in a position where a corner falls and they got Ward back, one of the things that you know, so with L'Jarius Sneed, he played safety a year in college, and he's been kind of this guy that they've moved around a lot, similar to how they used Matthew in the past in terms of you as a nickel guy and all that stuff. So if they were sitting there at 30, and they've got there's not an edge that they like, and they could find an outside corner, and that just meant that you get L'Jarius Sneed on the field, kind of in that role, that hybrid safety corner role, that nickel role. I don't think that they would hesitate to make that
Okay.
make that happen. I think that would be making your defense
Is
stronger.
there a cornerback out there early that is projected to go late round 1 that fits the Chiefs scheme?
Gosh, this cornerback group is so kind of polarizing.
Especially once you get by,
I
Gardner, and even Stingley's got the injury history that you have to worry about.
Yeah, well, and so Sting is a name, and I just wrote him up. And maybe this is just me reading in it. It wouldn't surprise me to see Stingley fall really far. I think Gardner's going to go first. I think
Yes.
Booth is going to make a good push for it, but
Yeah.
um, Stingley, not just the injury, but there's also some kind of questions about his effort and his, he's got such an elite athletic profile, and like the freshman year at LSU was so
Yeah.
good. But then the last, like after that, it just seemed like he looked like a different player, and it wouldn't surprise me to see him fall pretty
I
far in the
agree.
first
I
round, a
agree.
lot
It's possible.
farther than people
They
think.
could be scared off.
Um,
Yeah, I think that's
yeah,
possible.
I don't know if there is a guy. I don't know if he'll fall to 30.
Yeah, that would be a
But
little low.
those are
I
the
mean,
big
yeah,
three.
I
Yeah,
would be shocked by that. Yeah.
yeah, that would be a kind of a surprise. Um, Outside of that, I think if you're sitting there and those big three are gone, maybe you look at a trade back, because um, I'm not a huge fan of this cornerback class. There's some guys I think on day 2 that offer a little bit more value.
Okay.
Um, but I I think after Booth and Stingley, and I still need to go back and watch McCreary and some of those other guys, but um, I think that really those values start to dip pretty
I
hard.
agree. I
And
agree.
again, if you're in a position where you have to grab somebody, you do.
Yeah,
But
I think you're spot on. I think unless Stingley drops, then it's just if you don't like an edge rusher, then you probably should think of trading down at that point. Yeah, I agree.
yeah, or another position. Again,
Could be
there's plenty
safety.
of positions that could, yeah, safety, defensive tackle. I mean, it would be a little bit of a surprise pick, but a defensive tackle, Travis Jones out of UConn, who had a really
That's
good
right. There you
combine,
go.
and he's kind of that one tech
Yeah.
build. That would be one of those sneaky picks that I don't think would be super popular, but would make sense for the team. Again, really any edge rusher who fits the
Yeah.
bill. And then if all the defense, is run out, then maybe you look at some of those wide receivers, because there are a lot of wide receivers in this class that could, fit in nicely with the Chiefs.
And but is that depending also on whether or not they sign Robinson or
Yeah,
Smith?
yeah. So I think that's the big one is,
Okay.
if you bring in one of those guys, then you
And
certainly
you're
don't
okay
want to.
there. Yeah.
You don't need to double dip at wide
No.
receiver in this offense. You just need one guy to, be the third option really behind Travis and Tyreek.
All right, Tom. Great job as always. I look forward to talking to you again when it's all said and done, and then we can kind of recap what you liked, what you didn't like about free agency and the draft, and in between our discussions, again, they can find you out at Arrowhead Tom on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And how many times are you going to be posting, would you say, between now and the draft? What you're responsible for?
Yeah. So I just got, like I said, I just moved. I'm still unpacking I just got my system unpacked. So we'll see. I'm hoping to cover a lot more prospects, and again, most of that'll be, you can follow it on Twitter, and there will be plenty of that over there, and I'm hoping optimistically we'll get to at least 50 prospects. These are specifically, I'm not writing up quarterbacks or anything like that the Chiefs don't need. These are guys that I think the Chiefs are going to look at, probably early on day 1, day 2, a couple day 3 guys sprinkled in. I've been working on this pretty much all season. It's just one of those things with job changes and a move. Didn't get as many done as I wanted, but I've got a pretty good amount of them done. I'm pretty excited about the product. So, starting something new, and it's been good. So you'll see a lot of it. We're also taking a look at the different positional needs, just like we did today. Kind of writing those out and putting those out on Twitter. So that's where you can find me at Arrowhead Tom, and that's where you'll find those write-ups.
Excellent. Tom, appreciate it. Again, we look forward to talking to you after the draft. Best of luck with the new situation, being in Kansas City and all, and congratulations on that as well.
All right. Thank you.
You got it. Take care, Tom.